Mike and Jack were making a pen for the chickens on the island when they heard a loud, vibrating noise overhead. A great black helicopter swung into view, looking like an angry wasp. It was heading straight for them. "It's a chopper!" shouted Jack in panic. "Quick, hide!" The boys seized the chicken crate and fled into the thick undergrowth. The helicopter swung over the lake and began to hover over the island. Peggy and Laura, gathering mushrooms on the hillside, looked up anxiously, then threw themselves under some bushes. Inside the helicopter, P.C. Cooper was scanning the ground below. "Keep your eyes peeled," he said to Henry. "Look! What's that?" Henry looked down, then gulped and shut his eyes tight. "I can't see anything," he croaked truthfully. "I thought I saw something behind those trees. No, nothing there. Okay, pilot, let's move to the other side of the island." The helicopter banked away, and Jack and Mike crept out from under a thicket. The two girls came running, Prince at their heels. "Did they see you?" called Peggy. "I hope not," answered Mike. "It's all up if they did." "Our camp isn't well enough hidden," said Peggy thoughtfully. "We were lucky they didn't spot it." "We've talked about having a proper house that's really secret," said Jack. "I want to show you something that I found when I was looking for wood. Come on." The other children followed Jack, Prince trotting beside them. "Why don't we live in that cave we found?" said Peggy. "It'd be great for the winter," said Jack. "But we can have 2 houses, one for winter and the other for summer." They arrived at a clearing in the middle of the trees. Jack pulled back some low branches and revealed an old wooden door, half hanging off its hinges. "Is this secret enough?" he asked triumphantly. Mike stepped inside. "Jack, it's perfect!" The others followed him in. The hideout was made from dark wood, so it was very gloomy, despite 2 small high windows. A somber crucifix hung on the wall. There was an old metal bed and a carved wooden chair. Everything was dusty and covered with cobwebs. The children worked hard all day, cleaning the hideout and shifting their belongings from their original camp. Peggy leant on her broom happily. "What with this place and the cave, we could live on this island forever." Henry, still looking a little green after his ride in the helicopter, pulled up his car in front of the farmhouse. Harriet was in the garden chatting to old Luke. "They got you back in one piece, then?" Luke called out as Henry strode towards them. "I seen you fly by. Did you enjoy the trip?" "Never mind that," said Henry. "Did you see the local paper?" He held it up. On the front page was a big picture of Peggy, Mike and Laura and a smaller one of Jack, with the headline, "Local Children Disappear." Suddenly, with a squeal of brakes, a police car came to a halt outside the gates. "There's that copper again," muttered Luke. "I'm off." "Any news, Constable?" called Harriet worriedly as P.C. Cooper walked towards them. "Of the children? I'm afraid not. However, after your husband had gone, I had a few words with my sergeant. A very inquisitive man is Sergeant Taylor." P.C. Cooper looked steadily at Henry. "Come to the point," said Henry. "This is how he sees it," said P.C. Cooper, turning to Harriet. "Your brother, Thaddeus Arnold, disappears at sea, presumed drowned. He had a great deal of money, which will go to his kids. And being their legal guardian, you have access to that money. Now, if those kids were to disappear forever, then, being the next of kin, you'd inherit the money, wouldn't you, ma'am?" "What?" Harriet was appalled. "You couldn't think that I'd—" P.C. Cooper raised both hands in protest. "Good gracious, no. But I'm sure you'll agree with me. The sooner those kids are back here under your loving care, the better for all of us, eh? Ta-ra!" Charlotte and Thaddeus were still scouring the island for raft-building materials. "What's this?" Charlotte cried, and stooped to pick up the end of a thick rope, partly buried in the sand. She pulled the end of it, but nothing happened. She heaved with all her strength. Suddenly, the rope came loose, and she flew backwards onto the beach. "Are you all right?" cried Thaddeus. Yeah, I'll live, she grumbled. No thanks to that thing I landed on. Thaddeus examined their find. Well, if it's what I think it is, we've found ourselves a dinghy, Charlie. Charlotte grinned. For once, she let Thaddeus use her nickname. Great! It looks as though we've got some digging to do. Jack was down by the lake early, checking the boat for leaks. As he worked, he had the strange feeling that someone was watching him. Jack! Jack spun round to see Tom heading out of the woods. He laughed in relief. Tom was a friend of his from the gypsy camp nearby. What are you doing on the island? Asked Jack. Just trying to catch a few rabbits, but you and your friends have scared them away. Oh, sorry. Tell you what, we'll be able to give you some eggs in a few days. Thanks, said Tom. He turned to go. And don't worry, I won't give you away. Jack ran back to the hideout as the others were just beginning to stir. You'll never guess, Jack laughed. It felt so creepy here sometimes, I was beginning to believe the story about the mad monk who haunts the island. What? Shrieked Laura. I knew something was watching me. Hey, don't panic. There's no mad monk. It's just Tom, a gypsy friend of mine. He won't give us away. Now, isn't it time you lot got up? Dwight T. Peach of Scoop magazine was frowning at an English newspaper in his hand. The headline read, Explorers' Children Missing. He threw the paper down and reached for the phone. Henry, I just read that Arnold's kids are missing. You've been holding out on me. You signed an exclusive contract for them, and you don't know where they are. We'll have nothing more to do with you unless those kids show up. He slammed down the phone. All that money, Henry muttered. And it's out of my reach just as long as those wretched kids are. I've got to find them. He paced up and down. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he was that it had been the children who had stolen his hens. When they ran out of food again, he thought, grimly, they'll be back, and this time I'll be waiting to snare them. He drove a series of metal pegs round the perimeter of his land. He threaded a thick electric wire through it, which he attached to a huge battery. Then he ran another wire from the battery to a loud klaxon alarm on the side of a shed. He laughed nastily to himself. If those kids come sneaking back here, they're in for a shock. It was a fine afternoon, and the kids were enjoying their freedom. Bet I'm the first one in the lake, cried Laura. She raced through the woods, Prince bounding beside her. Then she tripped and went crashing to the ground. Her glasses, knocked from her nose, flew into the undergrowth. And when she picked them up, she found that the lenses were shattered. Near to tears, she threw the glasses away. She turned to go back and discovered she'd sprained her ankle too. She collapsed to the ground in pain. Prince nuzzled up to her. Oh, Prince, Laura wailed. I can't walk. I'm stuck here. And look, the sun's going down. Suddenly, Prince jumped up and fled. Prince! Come back! She shouted. Nearby, some bushes parted, and the black figure of a monk looked out, staring towards Laura. She heard a twig crack and peered all about her, but without her glasses, everything was a blur. Then she spun round, full of relief. She'd heard Prince's bark. The monk heard it too. He melted back into the trees. The dog trotted up, followed by Peggy, Mike and Jack. Prince came and got us, said Peggy, so we knew something was up. I've hurt my ankle, moaned Laura. Jack and Peggy helped Laura to her feet and carried her back through the woods. When they reached the hideout, Mike frowned. Something's different about you, Laura. Of course, idiot. I'm not wearing glasses. They were smashed, so I chucked them away. But you can't see a thing without them. I know, moaned Laura hopelessly. I have another pair, but they're back at the farmhouse. The children decided that they had to risk another trip to the mainland to get Laura's glasses. This time Peggy went along with Jack, since she knew exactly where to look for the glasses in the girls' bedroom. They rowed across the lake that night and hid the boat under the jetty. As they crept towards the house, they heard the crackling sounds of a car radio. Quickly, they flung themselves to the ground. Then they heard the voice of P.C. Cooper, who was parked nearby. "Roger. No sign of anyone yet, Sarge. I'll give it to midnight, then pack it in." Peggy and Jack got to their feet and began to creep toward Uncle Henry's land. Suddenly, Jack grabbed Peggy's arm. "Look at that wire," he whispered, pointing. "It could be live, and it's probably connected up to that alarm on the shed. We'll have to go under it, but don't touch it." Gingerly, they crawled under the wire, clambered over the wooden fence, and headed towards the farmhouse. "That's our window," whispered Peggy. "It's not locked." Then she gasped. "I've just remembered. It squeaks like mad when you open it." "Oh, great," muttered Jack. "Then somehow we've got to get your aunt and uncle out of the house." He frowned. "I've got it. We'll trip the alarm." He spotted a heavy coil of wire that Henry had left in the yard, picked it up, and threw it over the electric wire. A great wailing siren went off. Henry came storming out of the kitchen, brandishing his shotgun with Harriet behind him. "Come out!" Henry bellowed. "You can't get away!" It worked, thought Jack, as he fled back to the farmhouse. He wrenched the window open and climbed into the bedroom, followed by Peggy. Peggy pulled open the drawer by Laura's bed, but it was empty. Frantically, they began to search the other drawers and the shelves. In the new hideout, Laura had gone into one of her trances. She had her eyes closed and a forefinger pressed to each temple. "What are you doing?" asked Mike. "I just remembered my glasses weren't in the drawer. They were in the wardrobe. I'm trying to let Peggy know." Mike shrugged. "Well, it's cheaper than phoning." At the farm, Peggy stopped and shook her head slightly. "I wonder if—" she murmured. Then she went straight to the wardrobe, pulled it open, and found the glasses. She waved them proudly at Jack. Then they froze. Footsteps. They managed to race to the window and climb out before Aunt Harriet walked into the bedroom and snapped on the light. She noticed the crooked curtains and the wide open window. "So," she said thoughtfully, "they were here." Harriet hurried outside again and practically ran into P.C. Cooper, who had been alerted by the siren. As he swung his torch away from Harriet, the light caught Henry full in the face. "Switch that thing off!" cried Henry, raising his shotgun. "Aiming an offensive weapon at a police officer, eh?" said P.C. Cooper. "That could put you inside." "Don't be daft, Constable. It wasn't loaded. It's just to scare people." "Like that alarm you've fitted? Seems to me you're doing your best to frighten those kids off, not get them back. That is, supposing they're still around." Henry bridled. "What's that mean?" "The longer those kids are away, the more it looks like something's happened to them. And we mustn't forget that your wife would inherit her brother's money. You'd better get those kids back again," barked P.C. Cooper, "or you're in deep trouble." Laura and Mike were waiting at the hideout for the others to return. A great gust of wind blew across the roof, and Laura coughed and shivered. "Let's go to the cave," said Mike. "You're not feeling very well, and it's a lot warmer there." He collected some blankets and steered her out of the door into the dark woods. They soon reached the cave, stepped inside, and settled down against a wall. Mike tucked blankets around them, then looked up, startled. A low rasping noise was coming from the back of the cave. The children gasped. The wall at the back of the cave was swinging out, flooding everything with red light. Silhouetted against the light was a black, hooded shape, and it was walking slowly towards them. The twins were frozen with terror. The monk stooped over them, arms outstretched, then drew back his hood to reveal a kindly, wrinkled face. and a pair of twinkling eyes. "Who have we here?" he said gently. "Don't be shy. Introduce yourselves." An hour later, Laura and Mike were running down to the shore to meet the rowing boat. "You're late," called Laura. "Did you get my glasses?" The boat came aground on the shingle, and Peggy stepped ashore. "Yes, here they are." "They weren't in the drawer, like you said. They were in the wardrobe." Gratefully, Laura put them on, while Mike helped Jack secure the rowing boat. "Come to the cave," said Mike mysteriously. "We've got something amazing to show you." Jack and Peggy followed the two younger ones through the cave entrance, Prince trotting beside them. As they walked inside, the wall at the end drew back once more, the red light shone out, and the monk stepped forward. Laura grinned at the terrified expressions on Jack and Peggy's faces. "Meet Father Francis," she said. "And about time, too," said Father Francis warmly. "Now, anyone for a cup of tea?" With that, he stepped back through the doorway, and Mike and Laura followed him. Yes, please," squeaked Peggy. "Come on, Prince." Then she, too, stepped into the secret room. "This place is weird," muttered Jack. As he entered Father Francis's cave, he was aware of a strange, rustling noise. Then he saw that the cave was home to lots of different creatures. There was a deer with a bandage on its leg, and 2 rabbits hopping around. A hedgehog was curled up in a ball, and on every available perch there were birds. Suddenly, a great owl flew down and landed on Father Francis's arm. "This island used to be an owl sanctuary, and I was the warden," he explained. "But when the monastery sold the island, I stayed on. I couldn't leave my birds unprotected, could I?" He stroked the great owl's head. "My little Aristotle and his family?" Peggy was staring at a crucifix on the wall, just like the one at the hideout. "So the place we're staying in was your place too," she breathed. "Yes," said Father Francis, "but it wasn't secret enough." "Why do you have a red light, Father Francis?" asked Mike. "Birds can't see by infrared light, so Aristotle here can sleep while I get on with my book." Laura was crouched in front of a radio. It had numerous dials and little lights flickering. "What do you do with this?" "That radio keeps me in touch with ornithologists all over the world." Father Francis handed round some mugs of tea and sat down. "Now it's your turn. Shouldn't you all be at home with your families?" "We haven't got families," said Peggy. "At least Jack hasn't got a mum or a dad, and our mum is dead. And our dad, he's lost at sea." Father Francis sat back in his chair. "Lost at sea, eh? I may have an idea about that. Now, start at the beginning and don't miss anything out." On the desert island, the castaways were excitedly preparing to leave. Thaddeus and Charlotte pushed the dinghy out into the waves and clambered inside it. Charlotte raised her camera happily and aimed it at Thaddeus. "For the last chapter, Thaddeus, come on, give us a smile." "Nothing to smile about, Charlie." Thaddeus pointed downwards. Water was spouting up, beginning to flood the bottom of the boat. "Grab the gear! We're going down!" They seized hold of their precious bags and provisions and waded hastily to shore. The two watched sadly as the boat tipped, floundered, and sank below the waves. Henry had stomped over to Luke's farm to complain about P.C. Cooper. "That policeman as good as called me a murderer," he said indignantly. "That ain't right," said Luke. "Not unless the police have got some proof." "Of course they haven't. I told P.C. Cooper those kids have just run off. That's all there is to it." Luke gazed out across the lake, nodding. "Aye, the haunted island." Henry's eyes lit up. You're right. I reckon that's where we'll find 'em. The next morning, Laura was down at the edge of the lake when she saw a rowing boat pulling slowly into view. "Oh no!" she cried, and raced off to warn the others. She skidded to a halt in front of Jack. "Boat!" she panted. "Coming towards us! Uncle Henry and Luke! What are we going to do?" "You tell the others," said Jack. "Then get to the cave and keep quiet. I'll hide the chickens." Jack pelted down to the chickens, shooing them into the cover of the undergrowth. The boat was just pulling up as he ran, crouching into the bushes. Father Francis was seated at his radio in the back room of the cave. Peggy had a map in front of her. She'd ringed the area where their dad had been when he'd lost contact with everyone. "You're sure it's waterproof, this mobile phone?" Father Francis asked. "Definitely," answered Mike. "So, if this phone sank to the bottom when the hurricane hit," mused Father Francis, "can you remember the number? I should be able to get a fix on its location." Said Mike, frowning. "It was 0407, 336260. Laura suddenly rushed into the cave. "People coming!" she shouted. "Must hide!" "I'll have to close the door," smiled Father Francis, getting to his feet. "I don't want anyone finding me here either." "Right," said Peggy. "We'll have to hurry and hide our rubbish." The three children slipped out, and Father Francis sat back down at his radio. "Now, let's see if we can get a fix on that phone," he murmured. Meanwhile, Prince was staying safely out of sight. As soon as he had caught sight of Uncle Henry, he'd dropped to his stomach and crept behind some bushes. Henry and Luke were making their way stealthily across the shore. "My guess is we'll find the kids in those caves you told me about," said Henry. Prince let out a low, rumbling growl. "What was that?" squawked Luke. The noise came again, louder this time, more wolfish. "Oh!" cried Luke. I don't like this, Henry." "Come on, let's get to those caves." The two men struggled on through the wood, looking around nervously. There was another growl, even wilder than before. "What is it?" cried Luke. Henry set his face and blundered on. Before long, they were standing in front of the entrance to the caves. "Don't go in there," said Luke. "We'll never get out." Henry's nerves were at breaking point. "You're just a coward, Luke," he shouted as he marched into the cave. "Aye," Luke shouted back, "but at least I'm alive and—" Inside the cave, all four children were hidden behind a huge boulder, silent as the grave. Then a piece of cobweb caught Laura right on the nose. Her sneeze echoed round the cave walls. "Luke," Henry called nervously. "There's something in here." Jack grinned. Henry was scared of the little noise, was he? He cupped his hand to his mouth and made a shrill, wailing noise that reverberated eerily around the cave. Mike followed suit with a noise like a wolf howling, and Peggy gave her best banshee imitation. "Luke!" wailed Henry. Then the cave door at the back slid open, pulsating with red light, and Father Francis appeared, his cowl pulled over his face. Slowly, he raised his arms, then he began to walk forwards. That finished Henry. He turned tail and fled. Luke tottered after him, shrieking, "Didn't I tell you?" The kids roared with laughter. Peggy clapped Father Francis on the back. "You were brilliant." "I've been doing that for years," said Father Francis. "Had to keep this place a secret, didn't I? By the way, I've got a fix on that phone. Amazing thing, satellites. It's time to put Phase 2 into operation." The children followed the old friar into his cave. As they sat down by the radio, Laura started coughing, and Peggy put her arm round her. "I think you should be in bed, Laura," she murmured. "Come on." She led her back to the main part of the cave. Father Francis turned up the volume on his radio controls and adjusted some of the dials. "Can you hear me? Hello?" When Peggy appeared at his side again, Father Francis pulled his headphones off, asking, "How's the wee girl?" "Not well," answered Peggy. "Jack and Mike have gone off in the boat to get her some medicine." Father Francis nodded. Best medicine for her would be to find her dad, eh? "Had a chap a minute ago in the right area, but the connection's bad." He slipped his earphones on again. "Hello? Hello?" Down the line came the faint crackle of a man's voice. "Can't hear you, mate. You're breaking up." "Hello?" said Francis eagerly. "Are you there?" After several frustrating minutes, Francis finally got a clear connection and relayed the information he'd received from the fix on the mobile phone. "Right!" came the voice, crackling down the line. "Gotcha!" "You'll be able to head there right away?" asked Father Francis urgently. "Will do, mate! Over and out!" Father Francis slipped off his headphones and smiled at Peggy. On the other side of the lake, P.C. Cooper was taking a well-deserved afternoon off, fishing. He scanned the still waters of the lake and practically leapt off his camping stool. There were the missing boys in a rowing boat. He raced to his car, grabbed his mobile phone and called the station. "Sarge, it's Cooper. I've got the kids. They're on the lake. I can see them as..." P.C. Cooper turned to the lake. It was deserted. "Well, they were here a minute ago. Hang on, I'll see if I can spot 'em." He raced down to the jetty. No sign of them. He swore softly, then spoke into the phone. "It's no good, Sarge. They seem to have disappeared. I'll go and have a nosy around. Bye." P.C. Cooper pocketed his phone and stamped off. Underneath the jetty, Jack and Mike crouched silently, clutching a basket of blackberries they'd brought from the island to sell. After they heard the policeman's car start up, they slipped out and made their way to the town. The first greengrocer Mike and Jack went to gave them a really good price for the blackberries. Delighted, they hurried over to a chemist to buy Laura's cough medicine. Jack didn't notice his grandfather, old Luke, watching them from across the street. Luke smirked and turned away, just as P.C. Cooper drew up alongside him in his car. "Morning, Constable," Luke said. "Is Henry still putting out that reward for them kids of his?" "Have you seen them?" "Well, no," said Luke, stroking his chin. "That depends on the reward, don't it?" The two castaways were in a desperate situation. They had lost their dinghy, and their water supply had dried up. They lay under the shelter, weak and ill in the dehydrating heat. Thaddeus gazed helplessly at Charlotte's sunburnt shoulders, and her lips flaked and swollen from lack of water. "I'm sorry, Charlie," he said miserably. "Thaddeus," murmured Charlotte, "before I die of thirst, there's something I have to say." Thaddeus smiled weakly. "I know how you really feel about me, Charlie. You don't have to put it into words." "Oh, but I do," whispered Charlotte. She had her back to Thaddeus, and he couldn't see her teasing smile. "You see, of all the men I've ever met, you're the most chauvinistic, self-opinionated and pig-headed of the lot." Thaddeus had his eyes glued to the horizon. "I'm glad you told me that, Charlie," he said, "before we were rescued." "What do you mean?" "Look," he pointed out to sea. Charlotte raised her head and saw a fishing boat heading straight for them. "And just when it was getting interesting," she grinned. Jack and Mike were heading back to the lakeside when P.C. Cooper's car screeched to a stop in front of them. They turned and saw the sergeant's car swerve to a halt behind them. Jack noticed that his grandfather was in the car too. "Over the fence!" shouted Jack. They were over the fence in a second, running at full tilt across a large field. The two policemen left their cars and gave chase. Cursing, old Luke was left way behind. "We've shaken them off," Jack shouted. "Follow me!" They tore through some trees and into the gypsy camp. There was Tom, perched on an old cart. He jumped down quickly. "Over here!" he shouted, running towards a yellow van. Jack and Mike scrambled inside. Tom shut the doors, raced back to his cart, climbed up, and sat there, whistling. P.C. Cooper and his sergeant ran up 2 seconds later. "If you're looking for two boys," said Tom, pointing across the countryside, "they went that way." "Come on, Sarge," said P.C. Cooper, and they charged off. Tom shot over to the van and pulled the doors open. "All clear," he said. "Tom, you're brilliant. Jack broke off. His grandfather had just tottered into view. "Got ya!" screeched Luke. Then he gave a shrill whistle. Laura sat bolt upright from her bed on the floor of the cave and put her hands over her eyes. "It's all over," she cried. Peggy hugged her. "Laura, what's the matter?" "Our dream's over. I know it," Laura whimpered. Then she stopped, her body racked by coughing. There was a noise at the cave entrance. "Someone's coming," said Peggy. "Maybe it's—" Mike and Jack came into view. "Yes, it is! Thank goodness!" Then she fell silent. Behind the two boys stood P.C. Cooper. The children followed Father Francis into his secret cave to say goodbye. "God sometimes works in mysterious ways," he said. "My work here has ended. My little patients are ready to go free. And Aristotle, I suspect he'll want to come with me." "But where will you go?" asked Peggy. "Wherever the Lord takes me, child. Go with the constable now, and my blessings are with you." Sadly, the four trooped out. Prince followed, his tail drooping. P.C. Cooper rowed them across the lake, then put them in the back of a police van. "What are you going to do with us?" asked Peggy. "Will you lock us up in some home?" P.C. Cooper just smiled. "You'll find out soon enough." The kids subsided further into their seats, and Prince whined. Then the police van stopped. "Here we are," announced P.C. Cooper. "Out you get." Slowly, the kids stepped from the van. "We're at Peephole!" gasped Peggy. Then, with a shout of sheer joy, Mike, Peggy and Laura were running at full tilt into the outstretched arms of their father. Thaddeus hugged them as though he'd never let them go again. "Oh, it's great to see you. Are you all right?" Laughing, crying, talking all together, the three children explained as best they could. "We ran away to a secret island. And we met this mad monk, only he wasn't mad. He was just incredibly clever. Was it him, Dad, who rescued you with his radio?" Always the professional, Charlotte was busy snapping away with her camera. She stepped back and trod on Jack's foot. "Oh, sorry," she cried. "You're not an Arnold, are you?" Jack shook his head sadly. "No," he said. "I'm not." He was feeling a bit shy and lonely. Charlotte took a final shot of the Arnold family, then turned towards her car. "I'll hit the road. Duty calls." Thaddeus's face fell. "I suppose it's time to say au revoir, then." "I'll be in touch," called Charlotte as she sped off. Thaddeus stood still, with a curious expression on his face. Then he turned and shook hands with P.C. Cooper. "I can't thank you enough for bringing them back safely, Constable," he said. Thaddeus waved the policeman off. Then he strode over to Jack and held out his hand. "It's Jack, isn't it?" he said warmly, looking straight at him. Jack took his hand and shook it, looking straight back at Thaddeus. And instantly, they liked each other. "Come on in, Jack," said Mike, "and we'll tell Dad all about it. Is that all right?" "Of course it is," said Thaddeus heartily. "Here, Prince," said Laura. You live with us now. Then the 5 linked arms, and with Prince circling them excitedly, they made their way through Peephole's front door.